So, right off the bat, do you want to kind of give us, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each maybe aspect of your career here, but high level, are you a branding expert, cannabis industry expert, or just a business executive? What brought you to the current moment in your career that you're at?
Well, actually, before I get to that, I want to thank you for giving me a second shot at this. I was supposed to speak 6 months ago, and like a week before, I realized I completely screwed up my schedule. You were very gracious about it. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And thank all you guys for being here, although I questioned your judgment because as I was coming over, I'm like, come listen to me talk. But thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
That's what I think every month.
So yeah, career-wise, most of my career was in marketing and public relations. So I got a master's degree in PR, and then I went right into a PR agency and did that for many years. And one of the things I mentioned earlier that I want to talk about tonight at some point is just kind of the pivots and paths that careers can take and some of the decisions I made, and not really knowing at the time how and why I made them, but in hindsight really being able to glean some wisdom from those things as I move forward. My big pivotal point in my career was taking a step back in salary, taking a step back in title, and moving to Frontier Airlines to head up their corporate communications efforts. And that really exposed me to a number of really important and influential people in my life, made a big difference in my career. Kept going down the PR path for a while with Smashburger when they were at 4 stores at that time. And then I went on to become a partner with an ad agency, so I began to expand my focus a little bit more into marketing, more broadly speaking than just PR and communications. And it was during that time that a client came to us in 2010, and they asked if we would help them with some brand work. And they were a cannabis company, and this was early on in kind of the growth of the medical cannabis market in Colorado. And that company was Dixie Brands, and so we did a little research for them. We did some PR, and I just found it fascinating because I'd always been in favor of legalization. I'd been, a pretty average consumer, not a heavy consumer, but cannabis had always been a part of my life. And when we started to do this research, and I started to see how people were interacting with cannabis and who patients were versus recreational users, even though again at the time it was really just medical only at that point. But I just thought it was so fascinating. So we did that work, and I wanted to continue working with them. But at a certain point, as the legalization movement began to gain momentum, and it became clear that legalization was going to be approved and then implemented here in Colorado for adult use, my company, who had many very conservative clients like Excel Energy and Centura Health, they kind of put the brakes on working with cannabis companies. But I had already gotten the bug at that point. I already knew that just being able to witness the birth of an industry and to be able to help shape that and have a voice there was going to be another game changer for me. So that's when I made the jump in January 2014, over to Dixie to become Chief Marketing Officer for Dixie, where I spent 4 years.
I also want to ask, is microphones doing pretty well? Can everybody hear Joe's answers pretty solidly? Thumbs up and back. Cool. Awesome. Turn it up a little bit, maybe. Cool.
Okay. I can
Get that
get closer like this.
So just to nail down the details in the bio a little bit, what were you doing before? You said you took a step back when you went to Frontier. So before that, you weren't doing public relations type stuff. What was that step back before?
I was, and when I say took a step back, I mean, careers are such that there are titles and there are roles and there are financial incentives. And at the time that I made the move to Frontier, I took a step back in title, took a step back in salary to move to that company, understanding what the opportunity was. So that's what I meant by step back. I was doing communications work. It actually was for a company that no longer exists. That for those of you who are closer to my age, you may remember a company called Video Professor. Anybody remember Video Professor? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I worked for them for like 6 months. It was interesting. It was an infomercial company, essentially, not really a CD company.
So you went to Frontier Airlines, then you ended up went from there to Smashburger, and then to Vladimir Jones was the one that was the ad agency you're referring to?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And then so Dixie comes to Vladimir Jones, and was Vladimir Jones doing work for Dixie, or the whole company was still trying to evaluate if they were willing to do it?
We did initially because it was pretty low key, not a lot of people knew. They didn't have a huge budget, obviously, so it wasn't like a big part of our business by any means. So at the time, when they first came to us, we did the logo that Dixie has currently, so that was from Vladimir Jones. And for better or for worse, I think Trip Kieber, who was one of the founders of Dixie, always associated me with that logo, and I'm not artistic. I have nothing to do with the logo. I just decided that I want to bring them in as a client, but he'd always give me credit for it, and I always correct him, like, I didn't do that logo. Like, guy actually, his name is Harry Forehand, actually. He's a great guy, funny name, but he was the one who did the artwork. But yeah, so that's, early on, it was a very small project for us.
So when you started off working with Dixie, either as, when you came on as CMO, just curious, because that is such, such a huge company and played such a big role when cannabis was just becoming legal. Can you tell us more about what the thinking was, about what was your brand positioning, what was your communication strategy, what was the whole, what attracted you professionally to Dixie, and what did you go into that idea with?
Well, it was, for me, and there are probably many people in this room who maybe will, I don't want to say take offense to this, but I had to give a lot of thought to it. This was January 2014. I have 3 kids. Legalization and kind of some of the way that has moved forward the view of cannabis wasn't the same in January 2014. And so for many, the reason I say some people may take offense to that is that there are many in this room who probably were doing this long before and dedicated their whole lives to it. And I have great respect for that. That just wasn't who I was, and that wasn't where I was in my career and with my family at that point. And so actually, just a quick side note, when I made the decision, I sat down with my kids, who were at the time, I think 9, 11, and then I have a daughter who was maybe, I think she was 4 at the time, but and closer. Thank you. And it was a really hard conversation with them. My 11-year-old was in tears. He was crying, and why would you go work for a drug company like that? It was a very difficult discussion. Of course, I decided not to take career advice from an 11-year-old, which was a good idea in hindsight. But so first I had to get through that. I actually had to, and part of the reason why I bring that up is that did drive some of my thought process. Why am I doing this? What do I hope to get out of this? And am I willing to put my family through, potentially difficult situation, although ultimately ended up not being the case. But I thought about the reasons why. The reasons why were actually partly as a parent and as a citizen of Colorado, a state that I'm very proud of. I thought, okay, I can sit on the sidelines, an armchair quarterback, and criticize the way it's being implemented or how it's being perceived, or I can be an active participant in that and maybe help to make some of the changes that I'd like to see, or implement some of the ideas that I have for not only for Dixie but for the industry as a whole. And I saw Dixie as a vehicle that would allow me to do that because of where their position was within the evolving industry. And I was correct in that assumption because Dixie was front and center with a lot of legislation. I got to work with a number of people at the Capitol, with the MED, and again, not to offend some people in this room, not everything worked out perfectly, and not everything is great in terms of how our system is, but it could be worse. I've seen it worse in other states, certainly, and I was able to be an active participant in that. So part of it was really, from a positioning standpoint, taking Dixie and marrying the idea of compliance and being a stalwart for compliance and being able to hold it up to as an example to others in other states and other countries. My first year at Dixie, we had people from every part of the world come through our facility and see what we're doing and how we were doing it. And we had legislators and regulators from other states who were considering it, who came through and understood how we were doing it and how we're being compliant. And Bob is here as well, and Bob was doing the same thing. And side by side with Bob, we were trying to make this industry into an industry, because at that point in time it was still forming. So again, from a positioning standpoint, it was compliance first and foremost. It was beginning to understand the consumer and what their needs were. It was also trying to be responsible, but not really understanding what that meant until we were in the market and had data. And my favorite example of that, and Bob will remember this, is we first were able to put out products that were 100 milligrams, which is what we have today, but it could be one piece or it could be 20 pieces or just no more than 100 milligrams per package. And I remember when we first came out with our products, and that was when we had some issues with people who consumed too much, and we realized, okay, well the consumer doesn't really think the same way as maybe the medical consumer, where 100 milligram piece is okay, and it was really difficult for us to all make that transition initially. But I think, and Bob, you can correct me if you feel otherwise, but I think we all came out of it thinking, okay, it probably makes sense to do one piece, 10 milligrams, and up to 100 milligrams per package, and that ended up being a really good idea for us. But it was learning that we didn't think about when we first launched. So learning what the consumer wants, what the consumer needs, and then also taking branding and elevating it, because it was actually a pretty low bar at that point in 2014 to be able to come out with packaging that looked better than most of the packaging that was out there, to be able to really formulate a brand that people could identify and relate to. So elevating the element of branding as it relates to packaging as well as to consumer connectivity.
So I imagine most companies in this space are kind of have been startups the whole time. So I imagine you wore a lot of different hats, but just like what was your day to day when you were at Dixie? Because it sounds like you were talking about things like packaging and what your consumer wanted, and probably some legislative, talking to regulators and inviting other people in from other states. So did it cover just whatever came up, or was there a defined role there for you much?
Defined in the sense that I didn't touch production, so I wasn't in the kitchen and I wasn't involved in making products, although I was involved in helping formulate products based on consumer feedback and our perceived market opportunities. But I didn't touch a lot of production, certainly wasn't involved in the finances, but everything else was pretty much open game, because we led with brand, right? So brand became, oftentimes we were told we were more of a branding company than an edibles company, because brand was, first and foremost in our minds as we did whatever we did with our products. So I think that anything that related to that, so legislation, absolutely, packaging, for sure, consumer behavior, definitely, product development as it relates to that consumer behavior, yeah, so it was pretty much everything else.
And what changed between when you started at Dixie and by the time you left Dixie? How much, more sophisticated, or how much had you gotten some things figured out and were on to new problems? How did that look by the time you were leaving that company?
Did you say figured out?
Some of it?
I don't know that, I would say we figured out some things based on both trial and error, and the fact that in some cases we had to, like going back to the example of the milligrams and the dosages, we had to figure those things out. We were forced to figure those things out. But I think even today, there's still a dearth of knowledge about consumers and how they consume, why they consume, the effect of the various cannabinoids and extraction technologies, and so I think we still have so much to learn. Now we certainly didn't figure out while I was at Dixie, but we did at least begin to see some trends in terms of what products were selling more, and we were able to create more of those products. And we also were able to, I think we did see an evolution in terms of branding. Where brands are today in the cannabis industry, light years from where they were in 2014, which is good and bad, right? Because at the time when we were really focused on our branding and elevating our packaging and everything else, we were one of the few companies that was really out front doing that. So we were able to stand out. Whereas today, obviously I'm not with Dixie currently, but it's a much harder time to be able to stand out as a brand, because there are so many brands that are doing it really well.
And so Dixie went through quite a transition, and that was kind of when you were leaving, right? Can you tell us more what was the end of your time at Dixie, I guess, or what was Dixie's next step?
So it kind of gets back to this idea of your path and how when I look back on my path, I'm able to understand maybe some decisions that I made and why and kind of where it led me. And it actually ties to GoFire, believe it or not, in the sense that as with any startup, and certainly in this industry, it's easy to get burned out. And I believe that in your career, if you're at a point where you feel like you're not adding value because you're fatigued or you're not able to bring to the table what you once were, then it's time to move on and maybe find the next thing. So towards the end of my tenure with Dixie, I was pretty tired, and it was partly Dixie that ground me down a little bit. It was partly just the industry overall, being with an edibles manufacturer. For those of you who are in that plant touching space, you know that it can be exhausting, and we did a lot of that legwork up front. So the years of 2014, 2015, 2016, while they were exciting, they were exhausting as well. So I was pretty, I was feeling pretty down, and I came across GoFire because the CEO of the company reached out to me on LinkedIn, right? And I'm sure, like all of us, we get hundreds of LinkedIn outreaches, and I just happened to notice. I looked at his profile and I saw what they were doing. I was like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. So I responded and I said, hey, it looks like you're doing great stuff, whatever. I think LinkedIn, by the way, as a side note, is a great tool, and I use it quite a bit to make introductions, to meet people, and I really do think it's an excellent tool. So he responded immediately. He said, hey, I want to get together with you for a drink. And he claims, I don't believe this, but he claims he was stalking me. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, we got together for a drink, and so I began to meet some of the team at GoFire, and so then I began to advise them. I was still at Dixie, and I was up front with Dixie, like, hey, I'm going to do some advisory work for these guys, and it was a breath of fresh air for me. I would go to the GoFire offices where they were young and full of energy, and they were doing great stuff, and they were really excited, and it helped me kind of rekindle my desire to be in the industry, to be involved and engaged. So it was during that time that I kind of made the decision that it was time for me to move on, and I started working in a little bit more of a permanent capacity with GoFire at that point, but also with a couple of other companies. I consulted for a little while with a couple of different companies, GoFire being one of them, and so I attribute GoFire and Peter specifically, Peter Calfee, the CEO of GoFire, as being another pivotal point for me, because they kind of really brought me out of that dark space that I was in at the time. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I first met you in a meeting when you were doing consulting for a handful of different companies. So what were you looking for? Obviously, GoFire really grabbed your attention, but when you had a handful of others, what kind of companies were you looking? What made, besides GoFire, just what were you looking for in that consulting period, and what did you find? Did you enjoy that period, or did you find that it just wasn't for you after a little while?
No, I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna lay myself bare here for a second. I realized that the greatest value that I could bring to the companies I was consulting with was the gray hair and the fact that I had a lot more just general experience than a lot of the people that I was working with. Most of them were much smarter than me, but just didn't have the years behind them that I have. And so I really found that the companies that I was able to benefit the most were the ones that just needed some guidance and some leadership and some maturity that they just lacked in their organization as a whole. And I was really enjoying it. I mean, it was great to go from company to company on a daily basis and really feel like you're contributing and adding value to the organization, which is the most rewarding thing I think you can do in your career, is to feel like you're adding value, right? So I loved it, and it was great, but I also knew, this being the cannabis industry, not all companies are stable, right? And the ones that we work for aren't always stable, but to work for 4 of them simultaneously that aren't stable, I was thinking, I was weighing all that, and although it was all going well, an opportunity to move over to a more permanent position with General Cannabis came up, and I felt like it was the right thing to do. Now, going back to this idea of sort of hindsight, understanding why I went where I went, I really enjoyed my time with General Cannabis. I liked the people there, but GoFire at the time wasn't ready to bring me on in a full-time capacity. I spent 14 months at General Cannabis. This wasn't by design, but obviously, but it just so happens that at the end of that tenure at General Cannabis, GoFire was ready to bring me on board. So, I kind of went back to my original passion that I had for that team and was able to come on board in more a significant capacity.
And so just moving now to what, once you were on board with GoFire, what's your day-to-day role there? I know you're president and COO, which is kind of an interesting dual role. That's not one you oftentimes see, I feel like, because they're kind of big picture and more day-to-day. So how do you blend those two roles, and what is your day-to-day there?
Well, day-to-day, you guys can keep me honest if you think I'm lying about any of this, but day-to-day is really to try to keep the train running on time, and to keep us moving forward in terms of operationally. And operations isn't my strong suit. I call myself like a soft operator. I'm not a guy who sits down with a spreadsheet and looks for efficiencies. I'm more the person who can help coalesce, around an idea and help create some level of momentum around different projects and see those through to fruition. And so I do a lot of that on a daily basis. But on the president's side, I'm also thinking about how we're positioning the brand and where do we need to be long term. As Peter kind of is more external and he's talking to investors and working on the fundraising and some of those efforts. So I'm in the office day to day, which was something back to the idea of being the guy with gray hair that the office needed. They needed someone to kind of be there day to day to kind of keep a steady hand on things. That's a majority of my role. So my part of my team is back there, and I meet with
They're agreeing with
a
you.
lot, all day, every day. So
Awesome. So do you want to tell us more about what the mission is at GoFire? Because you guys do have a whole suite of products and have maybe made a little bit of adjustments in the trajectory of that company over time. Probably some of which you were there for, or maybe some of which happened even before you were working with them. But what is the general path that GoFire is trying to accomplish here?
So when I was making some changes as related to Dixie and doing some of the consulting and had been talking to GoFire, I talked with different companies in different parts of the country. I talked with some big companies out on the East Coast and talked to some in Chicago and about different job opportunities. And what I began to see and realize is that Colorado was no longer the center of the cannabis universe, which, even though it maybe sounds obvious to some people, was kind of shocking to me. I was like, oh my God, there's all these companies out there that are doing all these things I've never heard of, and who are they? And I thought we were the only people on the cannabis planet. And so there was that piece, but also a lot of these East Coast companies were very medically focused, and they were doing really interesting things around medical cannabis or patients, more specifically, that we here in Colorado, with few exceptions, and Incredibles being one of them, we mentioned this earlier when I was talking to Bob, they, for the most part, the medical community here has been kind of forgotten behind a lot of the momentum with adult use. And so it began to occur to me that innovation wasn't going to be, what's the next best gummy flavor, or can we put cannabis in, whatever new format. It really needed to occur around some of the technology. And I was seeing little parts and pieces of that around the country as I was meeting with these different companies. And then, with GoFire kind of being part of that story, I realized that's a really interesting opportunity to pivot. And no longer am I, concerned with making sure that my chocolates or my drinks are the best tasting and that I have shelf presence. But I'm actually able to pivot to thinking about patients as a whole and how can this benefit people in a way that, recreational cannabis certainly benefits people. I mean, I'm not suggesting that it's not a good thing, but there are ways for us to put this plant to work and to leverage technologies that that's where real innovation was going to occur. And that's kind of, again, what really got me excited, and GoFire was right at the center of that. So back to your actual question, I know I'm a long way to my answers, but the answer to that question is, GoFire is really focused on creating a platform that allows patients primarily, although recreational consumers certainly can use the product, but allows them to track, dose, learn, and understand everything about the products they use. And so that can be edibles, topicals, tinctures, where we use our dose code platform so that they can scan a dose code upload that into our app platform and begin to provide feedback and data and track their usage. So from an efficacy standpoint, they can create a lot of data that way for themselves, but also then share it with a larger community so that if you have back problems, you can go in and see that X, Y, and Z products are going to be the best option for you. But on the hardware side, I thought we had a banner that had on there, but on the hardware side, we have the first and only, to our knowledge, dosable, trackable inhalation device. It's a vaporizer, but it uses combustion heat versus actual heating element of a coil to heat the oil, and we can dose down to 2.5 milligrams. And the cartridges have a smart chip in them that actually tracks exactly the oil that's in that cartridge, pairs the app through Bluetooth, and you're able to really, at that point, particularly with oils, really begin to understand exactly the combination of cannabinoids and terpenes that are having the greatest benefit for you, what time of day and how much the dose is. And, so it opens up a whole new world for people that are interested in cannabis for treatment, as well as for physicians who maybe would be interested in prescribing cannabis, but don't really have a good methodology for doing that. And then lastly, this is where I think in the last 5 or 6 months we've really seen some traction is around clinical research, because we actually provide the only platform that allows for repeatable, trackable, dosable cannabis consumption for research.
So the platform has I think I heard 3 different parts, right? There's the piece of hardware that you guys think is the most precise vaporizer dosage. So there are some other vaporizers that kind of let you dose it a little bit, but I have seen I kind of believe that you guys have that the internal mechanism there is much, much more precise. So that's part 1, the hardware. Part 2 is the app that pairs with the hardware and can reflect can know when the consumer is consuming the hardware, right? And that's the app. And then this other one is dose code. How does the dose code work? Is that your own products or somebody else's products that have the dose code?
So it's pretty much anybody else's products. We don't actually make any products, so it's Incredibles, it's Wana, it's anybody that has a product can either have a dose code on there, which is a QR code that we generate that actually has down to the batch level information about the product, that when that dose code is scanned, it's uploaded into the same app that we use for the hardware for the oil device, and you can track your consumption the same way that you can with the vaporizer. We can also do that via barcode, which is a little bit less detailed because it doesn't have the batch level information, but you can then upload that product into the platform as well and track that way. So it's a completely separate platform. It really was born out of the idea that while the inhalation device, the vaporizer, is a great tool for data mining, there's a million different modalities for people to consume that are out there, so we should have a platform for them as well.
And a piece of the app is saying how you're feeling or whether this is treating the thing you're trying to treat. Is that part of tying it back? Here's what you consume. The app knows what you consume, and then you answer some questions, or?
Yeah, so it is particularly as it relates to the dose codes and other products, not the inhaler, it is all consumer driven, so I have to input the information, but I'm setting it up such that I'm providing information as to why I'm consuming the product, how I'm consuming it, when I'm consuming it, and then I'm providing, based on the reasons why I'm consuming the product, I'm providing answers to those types of questions that are, at this point, a scale type of a model where we're rating the efficacy of the product for given purposes, but ultimately, longer term, we'll be able to customize questions for research and do a much deeper analysis of the consumer's experience.
Awesome. Where do you see that a year from now? What's the goal there? Even if is it expanding into other states, or is it dialing in certain aspects of the platform, or what's the trajectory going forward?
Definitely all the above. Hardware development is ongoing for us, so innovation is important. We have several patents already and several more pending. So continuing to focus on our IP and developing new products, particularly around the inhalation area. So our first device is what we call V1, and our next one will be V2, and we're going to continue to come out with new devices. I think the next important point is simply market penetration. It is a proprietary device, the inhalation device, and the cartridge is proprietary, so it requires a level of push to get those products into market and to get consumers to rally around that. And then
Because you're partnering with someone else to fill?
fill and then distribute. Yep.
Distribute, okay.
Yep. And then lastly is the clinical research, which I'm really excited about, because as I said before, we're seeing the traction from them coming to us and saying, you know, how can this device allow us to conduct our research? But it's also the data and the output from that research that I think is going to be really fascinating, that we're going to have a hand in. So I'm really excited about conducting several more of those clinical research projects. And we just kicked our first one off, or kicking off next week rather, with a university here in Colorado.
Awesome. I'm going to ask a couple more questions here, but if there are any audience questions that if you guys want to start thinking about those, we can take a couple of those at the end here. What advice would you give? You know, you said even before we started talking up here that you wanted to talk about kind of career trajectory and how you've made some changes and had to kind of evaluate what was right for you at the right time. So what advice would you give to people trying to make their way through their career in cannabis, or even not in general?
Well, I think one thing that I learned a little bit late in my career is the idea of taking some risk, and how that can potentially pay off. I think that it like I said, it was late in my career. I wish I had done it earlier. I think I probably would have had different experiences and probably been, you know, even a little bit further along in my career had I taken more risk. So I think that's important. Two, and I know this is cliche, so I'm going to try and say it in a way that doesn't sound cliche, but relationships and keeping in touch with people and providing value to those relationships. I mean, I've never gotten a job or an opportunity that hasn't been connected to somebody I've known all the way back to my very first job out of grad school. And I still keep in touch with all those people. So, you know, as hard as it is, it's work. I mean, it's not easy to just continually reach out to people and engage and go have coffee and, you know, send them an email, just check in on people, but invaluable. It's something I try to instill in my kids, you know, today, and I would say from a career perspective is critically important. As much as you can, do that. Be gracious and grateful to people that provide you support and help along the way, and stay in touch with everybody that you can. Really, really critically important. And lastly, and again, I feel like I'm learning more about this later in my career, but it's okay sometimes to bail if you have to. I always felt like I was like failing if I left a role, or if I didn't see something through to fruition, or to completion rather. But, and maybe I'm just making myself feel better by saying this, but I think it's okay sometimes if you see the writing on the wall and you're like, all right, I got to move on and go to the next thing.
Awesome. What are you excited about just in cannabis in general in the next few years? Do you, coming from what you've seen, Go Fire, always on brand. You talked about medical. Anything just generally that you'd like to see us be as a place you'd like to see this industry be at in 5 years or something like that? Is it all around like medical and research and all that sort of?
Well, it is around research. I mean, medical, yes, although I kind of believe that as legalization evolves and eventually at some point hopefully becomes federally legal, I'm hopeful that there will be two paths, right? There will be availability for recreational cannabis, and those are, you know, the products that we know and love today, but that there's a separate path where there are companies that are really focused on creating medical grade products that are going to, you know, target things like cancer or other issues that we know cannabis can be a benefit for. So I really do hope there's two separate paths there, and the future of medical cannabis, I think, is wide open at this point. But the research side, and even understanding on the recreational side, like, you know, everyone markets their products now as, you know, sleep or you know, fun or whatever, you know, effects-based marketing. I'd like to actually see that become real and have some data behind it, and have us understand other cannabinoids beyond THC and CBD and how those can have an effect. So really digging into the research and having something substantive that allows us to create customized products.
Awesome. Did we have any audience questions? If people had anything they'd like to bring up, I'm going to switch mics.
So, Go Fire is a hardware. Do you guys find more or less luck with different kinds of cannabis oil, ranging from distillate, CO2 oil, plant-derived terpenes, cannabis-derived terpenes, live resin. I know a lot of hardware companies have a variance of how their hardware works with the wide range of different cannabis oils out there. So does GoFire work with either particular companies that only make a certain kind of oil, or what oil have you found the best luck with?
So I'm gonna point you to Kaylin later to get deeper into this. I'm gonna give you my 30,000-foot view of this, which is I think what you're primarily talking about is viscosity, right? And there's varying levels of viscosity in oil. Our cartridge, because of the way that it's constructed and because of the fact that it's extruded, is a completely different methodology than most of the cartridges that are out there. So the tip of our cartridge, the nozzle, has a hole that can be smaller or wider depending upon the viscosity of the oil. So we can actually customize those and have plans to customize those as we develop new applications for it, so that we can do other concentrates beyond just oil, for example. And so that's an opportunity, actually, I think, for us from a product development standpoint. In terms of current day, with our actual cartridge as it stands today, we haven't run into any oils that we are incapable of extruding. I think there probably comes a point at which, if it's too thick, we'd have a problem. But Kaylin, correct me if I'm wrong, have we come across an oil that we can't?
No, I mean 5,000 CPI, 40,000 CPI, we press out by resin, so just about everything.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. So.
Awesome. Any other audience questions?
So you mentioned that IP is important to your company, and I was wondering if you've obtained any patents or trademarks, and if so, what hurdles did you have to overcome that stem from the fact that it's federally legal?
So we have 2 patents currently, and several more that are pending and filed. And in all fairness, I wasn't involved in the front end of actually filing those, but have certainly had discussion around what did it take. And because of the nature of the patents, which is really not cannabis specific, it's more about extruded, the extrusion process and the heating process that we use in our device, it wasn't as much of an issue. So the good news is it applies to cannabis. So we actually have had success in a couple of cases of blocking other companies from developing products based on our IP. So that tells us that it's pretty tight. But we didn't have any issues at this point, and we haven't really gone down the path of on the trademarking side of heavily trademarking product names beyond GoFire, because we don't produce our own oils or products. So that's been a little bit easier as well.
Awesome. We can
Sorry,
do one.
one quick thing to add. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we also look at this beyond just cannabis. Actually, this is a platform that we hope can be used in the pharmaceutical world as well. So we're actually working with a separate group that's actually exploring that and potentially looking at clinical trials for other products that are not cannabis related.
Awesome. We do one more question here. Jump over to the other side of the room.
Hello.
So I just actually moved out here from New Jersey 3 months ago.
Congratulations.
Thank
That was a
you.
fine idea.
So I just have a question. I know that you were involved in the industry in the very beginning, kind of getting into, with Dixie and everything like that. Now, coming from, I obviously there was love for you guys, but I want to move back home eventually. So seeing that you have right now where there's these huge multinational companies that are like pretty much flooding into the state with millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, where do you see the industry in like 5 or 10 years from now, where you have these huge Walmarts or Starbucks of cannabis? Like, will there be room for independent operators and owners to like really excel?
Well, first of all, I encourage you to really examine your desire to move back to New Jersey from this beautiful state. But
I also want to repeat the question a little bit on the microphone. So the question was, especially in New Jersey that she's possibly moving back to, a lot of big companies, a lot of huge operators, possibly not looking as friendly to mom and pops as Colorado has always looked. So in New Jersey or elsewhere, what do we do about it? Or what does the industry look like when there are these massive Starbucks, as she said, or Walmarts of cannabis?
cannabis, unfortunately, is not immune from the same market dynamics that any other industry faces, right? You have to be well-funded and well-capitalized, which is generally the larger companies, which beget other companies that become large, and they gobble those up, and there's consolidation, and there's cycles, and by the same token, there's also room for boutique wines, or boutique food manufacturers, or smaller mom and pops, but not as many of them, and they won't be as probably financially profitable as others. I think the one difference is that in many cases for cannabis, people have such a depth of passion and dedication to the plant that they are willing to, I think, suffer quite a bit to be able to bring a certain product to market. But I also think the market will dictate some of that, right? Because if you end up with a giant Walmart and people don't want Walmart cannabis because that's not what they're interested in, so it's nothing to say that that's going to succeed. I think quality of the product still has to be there, and I think they have to understand their consumer. But anybody who thinks that large multi-state operators or a lot of the dollars that are coming from Canada, or particularly in markets like the East Coast, like New Jersey, New York, that those dollars aren't going to end up becoming the dominant players in the market. Unfortunately, I think they're naive. So I think, again, there'll be room. I think it's the same market dynamics as any other industry, but it will be dominated by several large players.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us tonight and take some audience questions. Let's do a round of applause to Hodas.